Oh. What'd I do?
Yeah, he said, so he's taking you away. I said, yeah, he's taking you. Yeah, has all the athletic stuff.
Still out of. I said I was taking her out of town. I didn't make her say anything. This is an excellent example of communication or a lack thereof, because you understood things that were not inferred.
When I tell another man I'm taking my wife out of town, that is a means to put her to work.
Are you telling me that I was not truthful in what I said? I was not misleading. I was technically accurate.
You hold on to that.
So, welcome to the Marines, the few, the proud, the remaining who have survived inductive Bible study and an in-depth, I hope, look at Jonah. So, tonight we are going to go over the last step of inductive Bible study using Jonah. And I'm actually not going to spend any time in Jonah because I think you've already done that, or you're about to. So we're going to talk about a bunch of other stuff. So with that, we're going to get started, and we'll go from there. I think, don't quote me on this, even though it's going to be recorded. My understanding from talking with Chris, I'm just told it is. And I'm told there are people all over the country that are for some reason watching. Apparently they didn't know I was speaking according to Tony. So I hope that was not only technically accurate, but okay, there we go. Good. So I think from talking with Chris, we're moving on to worldview, which is if you've never studied worldviews, how people think, how they process information and what it means to them. It's very fascinating. And you're going to not have to be bored with me anymore, but you will be regaled with Tony Coleus, I think, and maybe Adam Tingy. I'm not sure about Adam, but I'm pretty sure Tony's going to be up here quite a bit more, which I am personally excited about. I've heard Tony talk a couple of times, and I'm actually pretty excited about that. And then I think we're moving on to apologetics, and I think Chris's plan is sometime in May-ish we'll be done with both of those segments, and I think we're going to take a break over the summer, but don't hold me to that because it's been a while since I had a chance to talk to Chris. So I think that's where we're going. So we're wrapping up a bunch of stuff tonight. Chris is out of the country. I don't know what he's doing. I haven't had a chance to talk to him in a couple of weeks, so I'm sure he's doing something important. So let's get started. There's 4 steps to inductive Bible study. You should know them really well by now. So what's the first step? Observation. Okay, hold on a second. My pen doesn't write that fast. We're going to call that seeing. That's what Dr. Lubeck calls it, but it's observation. 2, understanding. Close. What's the rest of that? Which Dr. Lubeck would call shared truth. What is the truth that the author is sharing with us? And this really confused me the first couple of times I went through the book, because shared truth is what we do when we talk with each other, right? But his perspective or his angle on this is, what is the author, what truths are the author sharing with us? So if we remember our talk about authorship, God is the ultimate author, and he uses men throughout time to record those thoughts and add their own, style and flair and things like that as the Spirit directed them. So shared truth is, what is God teaching us through either the actual principles, like he's telling us as he would in discourse, or most typically through narrative, and then occasionally through poetry. Excellent. So those are the 3 literature types. And so then what that brings us to tonight, which is applying, and that's what we've been calling it. Dr. Lubeck calls it response. So we're going to look at response tonight. So where we are in our study overall should be, we've done observations and seeing, and I've done this for a while, but it didn't occur to me until the week after I talked about it that really most of my seeing was actually asking questions of the text. It was, why did they cast lots, and why was that significant? If I'm on a ship that's about to sink and it's pitching all over, the first thing I do not think is we should cast lots and see whose fault this is. That's just not in my head. I'm thinking, where's a life preserver or something that's going to float because I'm fixing to need it, right? So I'm asking why am I thinking differently than they are? Why is that so significant for them? Where was Tarshish in relationship to Nineveh, and where did he start, and where is Joppa? And you know, there's all these different observations going on. I think we talked about there's a lot of downs in the first 2 chapters, right? He went down from where he lived to Joppa, and then he went down to a ship, then he went down in the hold, and then he went down in the whale, right? There was a whole lot of steps down before we ever get another up. And I think the first up was when he had his little in the belly prayer experience, and then he became whale vomit, or excuse me, sorry, Chris, great fish vomit, right? And out he went. I hope you noticed that the word great is used like, and it's hard because it's not always translated in all of our translations as great, but that Hebrew word is actually used like 16 times in 4 chapters. The fish was great, the wind was great, the plant was great, the city of Nineveh was great, right? There's a lot of greats in there. So there's a lot of questions as well as observations here. But I found out most of my observations took the form of questions that pushed me to do further research. And then all of that leads us to what's it mean? Because we're trying to seek to understand what's going on in the story. And so in a narrative, we have plot, we have our protagonist, antagonist, we have foils, we have, you know, all those characters that are part of a narrative. And then when we get these 2 down, we get to shared truth, which is what you did last week. So I'm hoping that we all found some principles in the text. So did you talk about, well, so if we've held true to form, I apologize I missed last week, but if we held true to form, then we would have identified principles. Chris would have talked to you about identifying them, and then you would have gone out and broke out and done study and found principles. So did anybody find principles in those 4 chapters that they want to share? No takers. Whatever it takes to get it done.
God's mercy. Jonah. When he's in the belly prayer and he's crying out, God, you know, saves him basically. And then again, comes in Nineveh, God's mercy for the wickedness of people, and forgives them and accepts their and so
God's mercy. Very good. What else?
Similar to that, but that salvation belongs to the Lord, and that's actually what he says at the end of his poem. That the whole thing seems to be pointing to. It's God's choice. He'll save who he saves. When he saves.
Okay, salvation belongs to the Lord. What else?
God's love for everyone. His desire to call them.
Okay. What's the first part? So judging sin. Is that a fair statement? Judging sin is to sin? Okay. So here's the thing about shared truths. They should change the way we think, and they should hopefully then change the way we believe or feel, if you will. The Bible uses heart language a lot of times to talk about what's going on inside and our I guess our feelings and our attitudes, our belief systems. And then that moves to how, of course, we respond or act, which is a lot of times couched in terms like throughout the Bible, you find in James, don't be hearers only, but be doers. You find in the Old Testament, God repeatedly judges the Israelites and the Jews because they have truth, but they haven't done these things, and they haven't Their actions don't reflect an inner heart attitude. You'll see it sometimes talked about as circumcision of the heart. In Micah, we have the famous question that Micah asked them, what does the Lord require of you? But to love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with your God, depending on what translation you have. That's a question that Micah poses to them, and really that is all that God asks you to do. And that's the laws and the ordinances and the directions and instructions that God gives are toward that end. So we're going to look at that a little bit. So when we identify shared truths, part of this is looking at what is God teaching through this passage that I need to respond to. So we've talked a couple of times about this, but there are three meanings to communication. So, and you'll remember this because if I'm in a classroom and the teacher is instructing and asks a question and I raise my hand, what is it I'm trying to communicate? What's my intention? I want her to pick me because I have the answer. I think I have the answer. So I do that because I'm trying to communicate to her, pick me, because I have something I want to tell you or respond to you. And so my anticipated response from her is that she picks me. So, but communication breaks down. Tony and I just had one because I said I'm taking my wife out of town, which is true. I am taking her out of town. He thought I meant for like a romantic getaway. What we're actually doing is going to Yakima and popping popcorn. So I'm taking her away to work. So while what I said was true, it conveyed something different to him than what I intended. I just didn't elaborate. My wife and I had the same thing where I'm walking through the kitchen and the trash can is there full. I think I shared this one with you. And she said, look, the garbage is full. Her message to me was take the trash out. But she didn't get the anticipated response because I misunderstood her message. I thought I was being loving when I pointed out to her and confirmed that in fact her observation was correct and the trash was full. And I kept on going, right? I learned very quickly that that was not the anticipated response. It was an inappropriate response and I got fixed. So it got the trash taken out. So, but those are the three parts of communication. It's no different with God's word. In fact, we run into all kinds of problems when we do what I did with my poor wife and with Tony. The anticipated response or the meaning that was communicated was misunderstood for one reason or another. In both of those cases, it was my fault. One, because I didn't understand what was said to me, and two, because I didn't clearly communicate to Tony what actually was happening. I didn't give him enough detail. When we misunderstand what God is saying in his word, then we end up with what we call bad theology, which theology is simply study of God. We misunderstand his ways, and then we either don't apply it correctly or we wind up going down a really bad road. So that's why these steps are really important. And you can't do a good job here unless you've done an exceptional job up here. You can't. And I will share this with you. A couple weeks ago, Chris talked about a lack of response to the teaching that we get. So you think about Sunday morning, we come, we listen to a fantastic sermon, and we go home. But we've been conditioned by that. Dr. Lubeck makes a great point about TV news. There was a giant earthquake in Chile, thousands died, millions lost their homes. Oh, and now this. Some athlete took some performance-enhancing drugs, and now this, a word from our sponsor, downing clothes will make your clothes really soft. Of course, you have to have soft clothes, or how can you get through the day, right? At the end of the day, there's no response required for any of those things. Unless you're wearing burlap underwear, then you might really seriously think about the downy, right? But other than that, there's no response expected of us. We're in the information age. We get diluted with information. We know all kinds of stuff, but most of it really doesn't require a response, not in any substantive way. I mean, whether Peyton Manning took enhancing drugs or not really doesn't matter unless I'm a Carolina fan, and then it's a big deal because obviously they wouldn't have won the Super Bowl if he hadn't done that, right? But at the end of the day, does that really even impact my life? No, not a bit. Yay, Denver won. That's the end of it, right? So the problem is we get conditioned to not do this because we're inundated with it. And what occurred to me when Chris was talking a couple weeks ago was that the pastor or the teacher tends to do these three for us. So we don't have to do all this work, which I would postulate to you that we actually are the ones getting cheated out of the whole deal, because you learn a lot by doing this, and it becomes more personal when you go to this step. Nevertheless, on Sunday morning, like if you go attend church here, Dwight does these 3 for you. And he tells you what this is, so now all you have to do is spend some time doing this. He just saved you tons of time. But we don't do this. We go home and go, well, how did Dwight do today? And it's not based on shared truth and our response potentially to it. It's, was I entertained? Yes or no? Because if I wasn't entertained, then it wasn't a good message. So sometimes you got to be careful not to kill the messenger, because the message, even though it's poorly delivered, is still exceptional. Other times, you get some pastors whose name I won't mention, but preach out of the Houston Astrodome, and they tell you you'll be rich if you follow God and you do all these things, and life will be really good for you. And he's very easy to listen to. He tickles your ears, as they say, and you think you should be rich and famous because, well, after all, you're Christian because you were born in America, right? But we get to the wrong place because we did these ones wrong. So I think that there's a lot of this going on, but there's not a lot of that. And so if we haven't done these well and finished with this, then we've pretty much wasted our time. To make that point, I'm going to read a bunch of stuff that came right out of the books, because Dr. Lubeck is a doctor and he says it way better than me. So if you have the book, you'll find these in the books. When you get these notes, you'll see page numbers in parentheses behind them. I'm not going to promise you that your page numbers are the same as mine. I think the book's structured a little different. From what Chris is telling me, I don't have the new one, I have the older one. So I can't promise that they're the same. So I'm just going to read a bunch of these. Some of this I've already talked about, and then we're going to look at some examples, and then we're going to get on with it. So we study well to gain understanding, and responding demonstrates our understanding. The Bible both explains and demonstrates that understanding and responding are inseparable. So if you try and separate these steps from this, you're going to have a problem. And this is the hearers, and that's where we get to the doers. So that's the difference. And you see that language again. We already talked about that quite a bit, actually, in James and some other places. Responding probes the implications of the truth for my own life, personally and specifically. So I like these, but our exercise is going to be, how do we personally and specifically apply these to our life? And you'll see what I mean when we keep going through here. 3 levels of meaning that authors communicate: the content, which we talked about, the topic and ideas, the purpose, the reason for writing, and the anticipated response. So we've seen where I've failed a couple of times on that one, right? So if there's an if-then statement coming here, which should remind you of something. If we do not cooperate with the author's intention here by responding in a way that is appropriate to what the author had in mind, then the act of communication itself has failed. And we saw that with the garbage, right? I didn't respond in the intended way, so the communication failed. Following the Bible necessarily means doing something about what we read. The truth claims of the Bible have not been followed until or unless we respond in ways that are in keeping with the author's intentions. We cannot truly claim to have encountered the truth if we remain unchanged and unaffected. So identifying truth really needs to be done with a lot of prayer, because then we're still going to do more prayer and some other steps we'll talk about to get to this response. How do we apply this? How should what we learned in Jonah, what difference should it make? I love that question as the 4-step of the NAV's 4-step model, which is essentially the same as this. It's just some of the wording is a little different, but they're essentially the same steps. I like, what difference does it make? Because if it's not making a difference, then we're failing someplace in this 4-step process, probably right here. Becoming the ideal reader of the Bible means that the reader desires to follow everything that the biblical author intends. The ideal reader carefully sees all that the author has communicated without importing his or her own ideas onto it. What would we call that step? Seeing. That step. Welcome to the class. Step 1. It wasn't a trick question. I'm not that smart. The ideal reader identifies the author's message and understands how the author has presented his thoughts. That's step 2, good. The ideal reader then determines from the text what truths the author has offered that are intended to be shared among all readers throughout time. Finally, the ideal reader demonstrates his or her willingness to comply with the author by responding in ways that are fitting with the author's expectations. There you go. The term responding emphasizes the heart and the head as well as the hands. So there's a 3-part to that. So we talked about that just a little bit, the head, the heart, and the hands. So Deuteronomy 30, I'm just going to read this to you. As I do, what I want you to do is to identify those 3, the head, and you're looking for thinking type words, the heart, you're looking for heart or emotion type words, and then the obeying. What do we actually physically do? That'd be the hands part that Dr. Lubeck talks about. So where we are in Deuteronomy is that the children of Israel are poised to go take the conquest of the land of Canaan and turn it eventually into the nation of Israel. And so that's where they're going. These are final instructions that are given to them before we jump into Joshua. So when all these things happen to you, the blessings and curses I have set before you, and you come to your senses while you are in all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and all your soul by doing everything I am giving you today, then he will restore your fortunes, have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. Even if your exiles are at the ends of the earth, he will gather you and bring you back from there. The Lord your God will bring you into the land your fathers possessed, and you will take possession of it. He will cause you to prosper and multiply you more than he did your fathers. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your descendants, and you will love him with all your heart and all your soul, so that you will live. The Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies who hate and persecute you. Then you will again obey him and follow all his commands I am giving you today. The Lord your God will make you prosper abundantly in all the work of your hands, with children, the offspring of your livestock, and your land's produce. Indeed, the Lord will again delight in your prosperity as he delighted in that of your fathers, when you obey the Lord your God by keeping his commands and statutes that are written in the book of the law, and return to him with all your heart and all your soul. This command that I give you today is certainly not too difficult or beyond your reach. It is not in heaven, so that you have to ask who will go up to heaven, get it for us and proclaim it to us, so that we may follow it. And it is not across the sea, so that you have to ask who will cross the sea, get it for us, and proclaim it to us, so that we may follow it. But the message is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you may follow it. See, today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I am commanding you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances, so that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God may bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not listen, and you are led astray to bow down to other gods and worship them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish and will not live long in the land you are entering to possess across the Jordan. I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, so that you and your descendants may live. Love the Lord your God, obey him, and remain faithful to him. For he is your life, and he will prolong your life in the land the Lord swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm sorry? Deuteronomy 30, chapter 30. And that's pretty typical language throughout. I know there's a couple of times when I read this that I kept hearing the Shema, which is listening or hearing, from Deuteronomy 6:4, 6:3. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? I kept expecting to get those 3. We didn't quite get all 3 of them, but we kept getting all your heart, all your soul. We got thinking stuff. We got obeying stuff, my ordinances, my statutes, If you do these things, then you're going to live and you're going to have life. Very interesting. When you get to Romans, you see Paul making those same kinds of comparisons between death and the curse and life and blessing. So in a spiritual sense, more in a physical sense, that was here. So did that kind of help us understand those three pieces of what God's looking for when it comes to how we think? Because how we think then changes potentially what we believe and what our attitudes and our worldview, and then of course how we act, what we do about it. So it's not enough to change our thinking. It's got to eventually filter into what we do. To follow the Bible, we live out these truths in practical, specific ways that include both actions and attitudes. God does not liberate us in Christ by giving us more and different laws, but by enabling us to look at literally everything from a different perspective with a new reference point for reality. Look in the 70s and 80s. I think it's chapter 7. It should be the chapter on responding in your book, if you're following along. I think it's about chapter 7. Is that about right? Okay. And I've just pulled these from all over. And I don't know if your page numbers are about the same as mine. That last one was around 82, 81, 82. This next one is from page 93. Responding starts with recognizing that we need to change. God's truth changes lives inwardly and outwardly. That's going to be important. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Until we sense a need and a desire for change, we will lack the motivation for significant response. Truth that has not yet been related to our lives in dramatic and practical ways is truth that has not really been learned at all. It is through responding that we translate our theology into personal autobiography. I love that one. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. So there's a lot of talk in Romans and Colossians, some in Ephesians, that talk about our mindset. And we talked about that before when we did a quick word study on phroneo, if you remember that. Going from the general to the very specific. That was several weeks ago, where we were looking at the structure of how you can go from specific to general topics, or you can go from the other way around, whichever one I said. So Romans 12:2, probably verses that we recognize. We're going to focus mostly on verse 2. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So the word conformed is a word that means from the outside, how do you appear? It's the shell. It's the outer piece. And then Paul sets up a contrast by using the word but, remember? So by definition, the word but means that what follows the word but is more important and contradicts what came before. That's why you never tell your wife dinner was really good, but the meat was a little burnt. Because she's not going to hear dinner was really good. She's going to hear I burned the meat. When you tell your kids, who got all A's except for that one B, you tell them he did a great job, and, because that's inclusive, it's in plus, it brings it together, it's not a subtraction. And when you get that B up, it'll be a perfect 4 point, right? You hear it differently. It means differently. Or you got a B, but you got all A's. So where's the emphasis? It's on the part after it. Paul does that same thing here. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The word transformed stands in stark contradiction to the word conformed. When you do a word study of those, what you'll find out is that transformed ultimately results in an outer appearance change, just like conformed does. Conformed doesn't result in an outer change. It's just what's presented on the outside. Transformed will ultimately result in a changed external appearance, if you will. But unlike conformed, which doesn't deal with anything on the inside, transformed begins on the inside and works its way out. That word that's used there is metamorpho, which sounds a lot like metamorphosis, right? Same process. So That word is used in a couple other places in the Bible. Two of them referring to the Mount of Transfiguration, which you won't be surprised to find out. Transfiguration is the exact same word as transformed. It's morpho. And if you remember that, Jesus went up on the mountain and he transfigured, or he metamorphosed right in front of them. So when we think about the word transformed or metamorphosis, I want you to think back to 6th grade when we had to go outside and capture those caterpillars and bring them inside and put them in the tank. And then every day we got our little science notebooks out and we had to watch them and make observations about what the cool little caterpillar was doing every day. And eventually went into the cocoon and then eventually came out as a butterfly, right? So let me ask you this. Metamorpho means a change from the inside out. That being true, tell me, why does a caterpillar go into the cocoon and a butterfly comes out? I mean, why doesn't a puppy come out? That'd be cool in 6th grade science class, right? How about a pony? That would be really cool. Or check this out. We take our family out for a picnic. We throw a blanket down underneath the tree where a couple of days before a caterpillar went into a cocoon and a water buffalo comes out and lands in the middle of my potato salad, right? Why doesn't that happen? Yeah, that was a stumper for me too. Until I realized that the reason a butterfly comes out is because a butterfly went in. Because the transformation comes from the inside. We're going to see that by looking at Mark chapter 9. I'm going to put my glasses on for this one. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transformed, metamorphosed in front of them. Now, here's what I want you to grab a hold of with our whole water buffalo thing. And his clothes became dazzling, extremely white, as no launderer on earth could whiten them. Right? That's pretty awesome. Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. The point is, so let me ask you this. Did Jesus become something that he wasn't already? When he transformed, did he suddenly become something that he wasn't before he went up on the mountain? I don't think so. And that's where I really picked up on a caterpillar really is a butterfly. There's a butterfly in there. The process of the cocoon or metamorpho just releases what's already inside. That's what happened with Jesus, right? I mean, do I need to convince any of you that that was already inside of Jesus? When he revealed what was inside, it was dazzling. It was amazing. They were terrified, right? I would argue that when you were born again, God put the person in you or made alive the person that is in you that he wants to reveal. And so part of transformation, theologians call it sanctification, is releasing what God's already put inside of you with that new life. When I started thinking about it like that, it kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things, because he's not going to change me into something that he hasn't already made me to be. So the point of all of this is to release what God's already put inside of us. That's part of the metamorpho. You go back to Romans 12, how does that happen? It happens by the renewing of your mind. So let's talk about words again. So renew is what? It's a compound word. And it's made up of re and new. Renew could also be translated renovate. This resonates with me because my wife is a renovator. She sees, when I see an old barn, she sees a palace, because she knows she could renovate that and turn it into something totally awesome and cool, which she's done in a lot of places in our house. So to renew something means in the beginning it was new, right? Renew means we're just going to make it new again, right? So think about that. Our mind, the way we think, the way we view life, was the way God wanted it. Sin entered in, and now it needs to be renewed. And that happens by renewing the way we think. Then we get transformed into that person that God made us to be originally. Does that make sense? Now, why do we do that? Good news, Paul tells us. I'm sorry? so we can transform, but there's a purpose for the transformation, and it's so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So I like the way the New American does that better, actually, because it says, renewed by the transformation of your mind to show what the will of God is. The will of God is your transformation. And what is God's will? That which is good and pleasing and perfect or mature. So there's a reason for all of that transformation that goes on. And so we get that by going through those verses. Well, in fact, I'll just read this because the nice man did a much better job of it than me. Reading the Bible with the goal of creatively reimagining the world in ways that agree with God's own perspective is light years removed from approaches to application that center on duties and obligations. Living life itself can be viewed as an artistic expression of obedient imaginations. If I am willing to buy into a whole new way of perceiving truth and reality, then certain actions will make perfect sense. They will logically flow from having my mind reprogrammed. And this is precisely Paul's point in Romans 12, when after sharing 11 chapters of mind-boggling, old paradigm-smashing truths, he then urges his readers to live logically in keeping with these newly seen realities. Freed from the restraints of old world thinking, our minds are transformed by these liberating truths. Verse 2, and we are free to live according to the divine logic that is otherworldly. It's a whole different way of looking at the world when you look at it from God's perspective. And we get that when we go through these steps and we finish strong with identifying the shared truths and then figuring out how to apply them to our lives very specifically. So, how do you do that? I'm going to take some stabs at it. We really don't get a lot of practical instruction on that in terms of the application. We just get told we need to do it. But I will share just a few with you from my readings and travels. So identifying the shared truths is obviously very critical. The better we do this, the better shot we're going to have at responding in practical ways. And then imagining. Probably never been in church and told you need to use your imagination. We sometimes, a key part of meditation is to imagine. If you took time to meditate and use your imagination and pretend, if I can use that word in church, that you're on the boat with Jonah and chapter 1 happens, you'll get a different feel for the Jonah chapter 1. When you imagine how that boat is pitching, when you imagine the economic loss of sailors pitching everything over because they are so desperate for their lives, when you imagine men who are trained and experienced living life on the sea, being to the point where they're afraid they're going to die and the ship, they know from their experience, is about to break up. That's the starting point. And if you read the story and you meditate on it, you'll realize that the next step is it got worse. And then the next step is it got worse. And then for some reason, they decided to cast lots. They're desperate. They're all saying, pray to your God. I don't care which one it is. I don't care who it is, right? I just want to find one that might care about us, right? So imagine that. I mean, the sea is going crazy. The wind is going crazy. This is pitching everywhere. You're certain you're about to die if some divine being known as God doesn't intervene. You're a goner. And then Jonah says, yeah, pitch me over and it'll be good for you. And they're like, man, then the gods will really be mad at us because he told you to do something and we kill you, then we're on the hook and we should row for shore. We should just try harder to get out of this ourselves. And God makes it clear that ain't happening. So they're like, please don't hold it against us. And they pitch him over, right? Imagine Jonah sailing through the wind or the air over the ship's edge, not in the water yet. He's free falling. He's got to be thinking, I'm done. Guess what? God, I don't have to go to Nineveh. I don't have to go tell those guys that are amazingly cruel. They're legendary cruel for the things they did to people. And I'm out of it. I got my wish. I may as well be dead. And then that doesn't happen. He ends up in the fish's stomach. Imagine that. So let me ask you this. When you imagine or you think in your mind about Jonah in the belly of this great fish, what mental image comes to mind? Are you thinking Pinocchio with the rat? There we go. It's this gigantic place, and there's this sail, and we have a fire and our lantern, right? And we're sloshing around riding the waves, and eventually we're going to catch one of those babies out its mouth, right? And see, you got to watch about popular culture, right? Or do you think baby in a womb? Yeah, see, my initial picture was the whole Pinocchio thing. And when I really read and meditated on that and started, I'm like, okay, when he says that he's in the depths of the earth under the mountains, what would it be like to have a mountain on you? Would that just be like crushing and suffocating and terrible? And then seaweeds wrapped around my head. I can't imagine the air in there is all that good. I mean, how are you going to sleep with everything sloshing around and it's all slick? And you think when that fish is swimming, you're not getting jostled. When you start thinking through all of that, and then he becomes great fish vomit, what do you think he looked like? You think the stomach acids of that fish might have had any effect on his skin? You think I mean, what happens when you're a fisherman and you handle fish all day? His whole body's inside of a fish. When he becomes great fish puke, what does he smell like when he shows up in Nineveh? Like, dude, don't get any closer. I can hear you from there, right? I mean, when you use your imagination, that's not the same as when we think about in Eastern meditation. Eastern meditation wants you to empty your mind. Christian meditation wants you to empty your mind so that you can fill it with what God wants to put in there. It's a significant difference. But you're still using your imagination to put yourself there and try and experience what it might have been like. And what you think about that is going to be guided very carefully by what you read here and what you've learned here. And then maybe it helps you really get in touch with the real person Jonah and what he really went through. And I know there's some argument out there you may have encountered that Jonah is just a story and it didn't really actually happen. It's just a story to convey a truth. I don't agree with that. I think it actually really happened, but that's my uneducated view. So I would encourage you then, when you're doing this, to imagine what life might be like if you did some of these. Some of these might be a little bit hard, but let's just go with God loves or calls everyone. If you did this the way God wants it done, the way it was done or demonstrated by God in Jonah, what would your life be like? Take a few minutes. Don't put your cell phone away. Turn your iPods off. Get quiet in front of God and ask him, what's that look like? Give me a glimpse. Show me what that means. What's that really going to look like if I do this? And then help me get to that place I just imagined. I know that's just crazy radical thinking for our Western minds because we don't meditate, right? And it requires that we stop and be quiet. And it might take a while. And I don't mean like an hour a day. I mean, it might take a while to really get a glimpse of that. But if that's what we're thinking about, that's what we're setting our mind on, isn't that what Paul said when he said, set your mind on the things above, not on the things on earth? Because this isn't an earthly response to what God calls us to do. What about mercy? What about repeatedly? That's how God behaved. How do we behave? Right? So those are, I guess, a couple of things. I would say spend a lot of time in prayer. And a lot of prayer isn't us just talking with God, but it's shutting up and listening and letting God's Spirit speak back to us. But we have to be quiet and be ready to hear that. Memorize verses that reinforce those truths, so the Spirit has something to work with when he wants to impress on you. And it'll be amazing. That's why we spend so much time memorizing verses in ACAD. We memorize these verses. Why? So that at the appropriate time, Spirit brings them back to our remembrance. Partly so he can change us, and partly so that we can testify to others about the good news. Ask for help from others. You have dear friends. Again, depending on how drastic these things are, choose your friends carefully. Tony's a good one if you want to get in shape and you really want to. He does a no nonsense. You don't toe the line, he's going to help you get there. So that's one of his giftings. I don't know that Chris would agree, but I do. So, and then continue, stay perseverant in that, continuing to read. Maybe do additional research. Where else does God show his mercy over and over again? And then beyond the Bible, where has God shown that in your life? or in somebody else's life, that you can see how God operates. So those are just a few, what I hope are practical ideas about how we can actually get to a response that is meaningful. And I got to tell you, having studied this, and then I've long said that you really don't know something until you have to teach it. And that's definitely been true with this study for me. I've learned a lot of things about observing and seeing that I kind of took for granted, didn't really connect. And that's been true all the way through here, but especially on response. You know, I don't feel like I'm pointing the finger at you, but if I was, I was very aware as I studied that 3 of them were pointing back at me. And I need to be very attentive to doing response, because it's easy to take in information and it's fun and exciting. I love doing this, but I have to get as equally excited about doing that. And we can learn more than we can probably apply, but that doesn't mean we don't need to interact with the principles God's giving us and really make a commitment to applying them. So I'm going to ask you to do this. We got about a half an hour-ish left. So I'm going to ask you to go get in your groups. I know you're in 2s or 3s, but I'd ask you to spend probably 10 or 15 minutes praying over these shared truths that you've identified. And then asking God, and then sitting quietly, asking the Spirit to reveal to you which ones He really wants to work on in your life. What's He want to do with that? Because that makes this whole exercise, I mean, that's the point of the whole thing. If it doesn't change our lives, what difference does it make? Then we've really wasted our time. And then after about 10 or 15 minutes, if you're getting a clear leading from the Lord, feel free to share that with your partner. Just what God's showing you about that. Or maybe you need to spend some more time really thinking through what it is that God wants you to do with that. And then, you know, again, I'm going to push these notes out, but I think you can remember, keep praying about it, keep asking God how He would do that. And if you don't want to use this study, that's fine. I know some of you are in other studies. Do that with another study. And then finally, every week we've been making notes, and at some point we want to turn those into Chris. And I would invite you to really make a plan about how you're going to put at least one of these principles into play in your life in a way that's going to change, that's going to make a difference. It's going to change you. So that's all I have. If anybody has questions, I'll hang out a little bit. But other than that, I think we're out in the lobby and break up in our groups and maybe talk about the things that we've learned and go from there.